So we are here today to talk about Ordinal's infrastructure and some of the companies building the future of Ordinals. I'm joined by some awesome guests. We have Ken, CEO of Xverse, Stella, Vice President of Foresight Ventures, and Jamil, founder and CEO of Gamma. How is everyone doing so far?
Good.
Yeah, good. Thank you.
So I think there's been a lot of talk about ordinals so far. Maybe it'd be good to just get kind of like a TLDR on what ordinals and inscriptions are, maybe the differences between them, and we can kind of dive in from there.
Yeah, sure. So obviously this is all new, new stuff just in the past few months. But a lot of people ask me, like, what are actually ordinals? I think everybody has some surface level understanding that, hey, this digital assets have come to Bitcoin, or monkey JPEGs have come to Bitcoin, or shitcoins have come to Bitcoin. But what does it actually mean? And what underlies this? And it's actually quite an elegant protocol. It was first proposed in a Bitcoin talk post in like 2013, actually ordinal theory. And it's a way of basically tracking UTXOs and numbering Satoshis back to the block in which they were mined. So you have a Coinbase reward in a block, and you assign basically those block rewards numbers from start to finish. So I could say I have like sat number 1 to 1,000, or whatever the Coinbase reward at the time was, and that's your input. Then you split that up into different outputs, and the sats get numbered according to the order of the outputs. So it basically assigns a numbering system that takes advantage of the structure of Bitcoin transactions that's unique based on the UTXO model to basically figure out how you assign a number to each sat. That's the first part. The second part is actually putting data on chain. And this is basically using the witness data to encode using basically opcodes op-push in order to put data directly on chain as well. And you can assign that data to one of those sats. So not only now do you have a way of tracking where your Bitcoin flows, but also a way to associate data with each of those sats. And I think those two things combined have made it possible to basically represent assets, transfer assets directly on the Bitcoin L1.
So I think ordinals started to click for me when I realized that they were like really Bitcoin native and kind of just a lens to view Bitcoin through with ordinal theory. So I'm pretty interested in hearing your thoughts on how ordinals can kind of like inherit the properties of Bitcoin and how it incentivizes, best practices and the right ways to use Bitcoin.
Yeah, I can start. So I think one thing that Ordinals really inherits from Bitcoin is the immutability, right? If you compare it to the other NFT protocols and other chains, the key difference is that the data for Ordinals, Ordinal NFTs, is written directly to the chain, right? And that's different from anything else out there. And that really introduces kind of like a scarcity factor to Ordinals, because now you're limited by the block space of Bitcoin, how much or how many ordinals, images or not, you can inscribe onto the chain, right? And it's not like Ethereum where you can deploy a single smart contract and essentially mint an unlimited number of whatever NFT that you want to mint, right? So there's that scarcity factor, and I think that's really important.
I do think for our investor side, I do think the ordinals can create a new innovation different from the layer 2, Bitcoin layer 2. So actually it capitalized the past enhancement for the Bitcoin network, such as SegWit and also Taproot. So I think that those improvements also gave the chance to let the new users to enter this industry. And before that, I do think some people don't have the ability to enter in the Bitcoin network because they think they're highly cost for the ecosystem. So right now is a good chance.
Yeah, one thing that's been really interesting is just to see how many people this has onboarded onto Bitcoin. I was talking to someone just the other day at PlebFi, and he was saying he personally, with his group of 2 other people, got 2,200 new nodes onboarded onto the network from people that were coming from different ecosystems outside crypto, suddenly learning how to use Sparrow and manage UTXOs and learn the principles of self-custody, learn best practices, learn what Bitcoin really is. And I think once they discovered this, they're not going back. right? You've brought new people into the network, you've increased the health of the network, and you've brought people into the principles and values that make us Bitcoiners.
Yeah, we're seeing people come into Discords and instantly be taught best practices and learning about things that people who have been in Bitcoin for 5 years never thought about, like coin control and UTXO management. So it seems very positive. Obviously, we've seen like a huge uptick in fees as a result of inscriptions. So I'm curious if any of you have plans to integrate Lightning to mitigate that, and if not, kind of just generally speaking, how you see Lightning integration being beneficial for businesses that rely on on-chain transactions pretty heavily.
Yeah, I can start. So, we're a wallet and we're a Bitcoin wallet, so it makes a lot of sense for us to integrate with Lightning, and that's been in our plans for a while. We've kind of been slow at it because of some of the issues with user experience on Lightning, but recently there's been quite a bit of development in that sense that could enable a much better Lightning wallet experience. And I think more than ever now, it's more important for Lightning to be adopted, because if you just look at the fees, ordinals is just one single use case, right? And it's already driving the fees to a point where regular transactions for the average person doesn't make sense anymore due to the cost, right? Even for ordinals, if you wanted to do a swap, you're paying tons of fees just to do those. So I think having Lightning, we can move a lot of these use cases onto a second layer. I think there are some projects that are already working on a way to move ordinals onto Lightning, but I think it's difficult and it's probably like very early. But I would love to see ordinals, trading, transfers being enabled on Lightning, and taking some load off of the layer one and reducing the fees.
I do think that before the ordinals, users already suffer from the high baseline and transaction fees for Bitcoin. So actually, this new innovation can bring lots of users on board to the Bitcoin network, and also they want to find some big ordinals and also other innovations in the Bitcoin network. So it also can be a chance to change the Bitcoin culture, community culture, just like the change to the culture to the development-oriented community and culture to enhance the ability for Bitcoin network. So for the users' perspective, they can know more specific use case, especially in the Bitcoin network, and also to find out the more usage in the Bitcoin network, and also they want to purchase the BRC20 or probably the other token. It could be easier way for them.
Yeah, I've been keeping a close eye on Taro, RGB, and a lot of the progress being made on Lightning assets. I think right now there are too many competing standards for them, and it's hard to pick one that's then going to be like the winner or the one that drives the adoption curve of bringing assets to Lightning. So I think it's going to take time for the community to converge on a solution that I think we all feel good about in bringing assets to layer 2. So I think it's not something you want to rush into and do it imperfectly. You want to make sure that you're choosing the right protocol with the right trade-offs, and that it actually makes the user experience better than what it is now. And also, crucially, do it in a completely trustless way. Like currently, for example, on Bitcoin, most of the marketplaces use purely PSBT, partially signed Bitcoin transaction solutions, which are completely trustless, completely in line with Bitcoin, have pushed Bitcoin infrastructure forward. We don't want to move to layers that involve, trust assumptions or bridging in a way that isn't in line with sort of the trustless assumptions we want to work with.
Yeah, maybe we could stick with PSBTs a little bit more. It's become kind of like the biggest piece of tech for people to build these infrastructure and new toolings with. So, building kind of like the descending auctions, the problems with building traditional auctions. Maybe you could go into a little bit of what PSBTs are, how they work, and some limitations, and what can be built in the future.
Yeah, it's actually really, really elegant how a lot of the marketplaces work. On ETH, for example, you have these complex smart contracts subject to reentrancy attacks, subject to all the programming bugs that we're all used to. And they're for the most part, I mean, there's some exceptions with some protocols for upgrading contracts, but they're immutable. So if you have a bug, you really can't fix it. And this has happened so many times before. I mean, there's a leaderboard of like smart contract hacks that just goes on and on. And the PSBT approach for trading inscriptions is so elegant. You basically just construct a partially signed Bitcoin transaction. It looks like any other Bitcoin transaction. You have one input, which is your inscription, and one output, which is the amount of BTC you're willing to receive for that inscription. So you have your inscription UTXO and your payment output. And then you sign it with a SIG hash type, SIG hash single, SIG hash anyone can pay, which means that anyone can pay for the inscription. And so the buyer can fill in the rest of that transaction and then broadcast it to the network in a permissionless way. And in that way, you've set up a structure where you're almost describing exactly what you want in the transaction. I want this input, and I want exactly this output back. And any buyer can fulfill it. And I think you've seen this explosion in use of PSBTs and trustless Bitcoin infrastructure that suddenly people are using and discovering for the first time. No centralized exchange, no intermediary, no middleman that can censor these transactions. And I think that's building very much in line with the ethos that we want to.
Yeah, I just wanted to add, PSBTs have been around for a while as a concept on Bitcoin, but hasn't really seen much adoption because the user experience was not there. I think before we released our support on our web extension for PSBT signing, people were actually copying and pasting these long strings of partially signed Bitcoin transactions and using some desktop wallets to sign these. It was just not a great experience. And I think with these use cases now, like trading of ordinals, we can see all this technology that's already there actually being deployed in production. So yeah, it's pretty exciting.
Yeah, I think that's exactly what I was doing at the start, actually. But it's a good way to learn. PSBTs were mainly multi-sig to start. So I guess it's kind of a separate question. Are you guys in the same boat as me where you kind of separate ordinals into two categories now with BRCs and kind of ordinals as an art medium and a way to store data and text and everything else under the sun on Bitcoin, and then kind of this BRC20, which has basically become like a new fungible token standard, and there's definitely a lot you could say about ways to improve it, and would love to hear your thoughts across the board there, but the market has kind of been the referee and said that it's definitely attractive. So are you guys separating the art versus the fungible tokens on ordinals?
Yeah, for us, we think these are fundamentally different protocols, and to be honest, I think BRC20 is not a great protocol. It's super inefficient, and there's a lot of technical limitations. What I think is that eventually something better, a better standard will come along and replace BRC20, even on top of ordinals. Not to mention, the other standards being worked on Lightning, that could be a better solution. But like people want to use BRC20, and we see a lot of demand for that. The fees on the chain were driven up to like 500 sats per byte, I think, over a week ago because of BRC20. So that demand is there, and as a wallet provider, we have to build for what users want, right? So yeah.
I do think from the investor perspective, so there is an imaging of the BRC20 as a new standard for no fungible token. So actually, the people so bullish in the BRC20, they see a quite different trend from the Ethereum ecosystem. So they want to know what has happened in the Bitcoin, the largest and most well-known digital asset. So before that, actually, I think the BTC already faced the criticized about their insider and developers for their perceived stagnation. So the people pursue for the new innovations for the BTC network. So the BRC20 gives this chance to know what's the future, what's the usage, physical usage for the Bitcoin network. And also for the other one, Xverse and Gamma, they do list the BRC20 NFT, and also they do have the more users to onboard on their platform. So I think that's a good infra, especially for the Bitcoin network. For our perspective, we do want to look for some new trend and also new project in the infra, firstly.
I think it's an interesting experiment, is the way I would put it. Like you see a lot of meta protocols and different things being done on top of ordinals. But the best ideas don't always win at first. It's the ones that capture market traction, or it's the ones that capture the imagination or the momentum around different things. I think like it's going to be a time where people will recognize the momentum, then maybe take a step back and think, how can we do this in the best way? Like I feel like even a lot of the stuff that BRC20 solves is probably something that you could do with colored coins without even talking about ordinal theory, right? Like you could do this in a very simple way without even adding protocol on protocol on protocol and trusting centralized indexers and things like that. So I think it'll be interesting to see how the space develops. Take what's best about the ideas and then try to figure out what's the right solution for some of these problems instead of building kind of Rube Goldberg machines that may be subject to deficiencies in the protocol.
Yeah, I think there's some great arguments for improvements, and I kind of thought to like stay on the sidelines for far too long because of that. So the market has kind of determined that there's interest right now, and I think from the venture perspective, Stella, it'd be interesting to hear kind of like the uptick in interest, specifically around BRCs. We've seen a lot of adoption, more so specifically in BRCs versus like art and JPEG ordinals. Binance is obviously looking to get involved. We saw MicroStrategy today say they were interested in building ordinals applications. So I guess from the venture standpoint, are you seeing this as like a huge investment sector for the next couple of years?
Yeah, I do think so. Because actually, I do think the Ethereum ecosystem, they already have the really complex infra and also some application adoption, and such as GameFi, SocialFi project on the existing market. But for the Bitcoin ecosystem network, they didn't figure out any interesting project right now. They are just still building in the infra. So I do think the imaging of ordinals protocol is a good chance to let the people notice, renew about the Bitcoin network right now. So it's quite a new chance for the VC side, because VC also look for some truly infra into the different crypto project. As our Foresight venture, actually, we're covering a lot different kind of project right now. We can expect how many people will pay attention on the Bitcoin network, and also probably we will see lots of builders and developers and pay attention, transfer from other ecosystem to the Bitcoin ecosystem to building the amazing network. So I do think probably we are not the only one venture capital to pay attention on the ordinals and also Bitcoin ecosystem, but I do think probably the other venture capital, they also bullish in the ordinals and look for the new innovations in the Bitcoin network.
Yep, that's what I expected. So for Gamma and Xverse, you guys have been a pleasure to work with the Ordinals Alley, and it's kind of, I think to date, the biggest Ordinals in-person gallery. I'm interested in kind of hearing how your experience has been, both with, doing an on-site gallery like this and what the experience is with on-site auctions. Gamma also built some incredible tech that I'd love to dive into with kind of like a descending Dutch auction that also integrates bids or kind of like limit orders in a way. So I would love to hear your perspective on that and basically Ordinals Alley in general.
Yeah, it was a really interesting experience to bring this to the physical world. We were used to dealing with this art on Gamma as a marketplace, as an inscription service. But we really wanted to showcase the people that make this possible, right? Which is the artists and the creators, and showcase all the great art and exploration that they've done to bring their work to Bitcoin. And not only do that, but do it in a way that when they want to share their work and when they want to sell their work, do it in a way that's completely trustless, completely permissionless, and do it in an open way. So we spent a lot of time exploring like what can we do with PSBTs? How far can we push Bitcoin to design these auctions and design this structure that takes advantage of things like lock time, sequence numbers. There's a lot of technical stuff that underlies these auctions. And they could be done in a much easier way if we trusted a centralized third party or something like that, but that's simply not the way we want to do it. We want to make sure that these artists have control over their work, that they can sell it for the price they want, that they don't need to trust an intermediary to make sure it happens. And so it's definitely been a technical journey to make sure how that happens. But it's been amazing to work with Bitcoin Magazine, with the artists, to make sure that we can showcase their work in a beautiful gallery outside. So I hope you all get a chance to take a look at all the work that's being done and all the amazing art that people have created.
Sorry. Yeah. I just want to say it's been a great experience working with you guys, and I have to give you guys a shout out for recognizing the ordinals hype very early on. I think you guys reached out maybe like in March, was it? And that was just when it was starting to take off, right? And it was a great experience working with you guys, and it really showcases that mobile wallets have a place, especially in these kind of like physical activations with art and ordinals. So, yeah, sorry. Really happy to work with you guys, yeah.
I think you guys have been a great example of kind of like porting over the aspects of other blockchains that we may find inferior here in the Bitcoin space, but are clearly like a great UI experience for users, and there's something that they're very used to. So what do you guys kind of see as things that we can take as lessons from other ecosystems? And it still seems very, very early for ordinals. So like, what should the infrastructure of tomorrow look like? And what are you excited for coming to ordinals next?
I think, when we first started building this marketplace infrastructure, there was very little documentation and very little tooling. Xverse wasn't out yet, so there wasn't a web wallet that we could integrate with. Everything was just very difficult to do, and which is surprising considering the long history of Bitcoin and the amount of technical work that has gone into building Bitcoin infrastructure. But for example, there were bugs in Sparrow Wallet where you couldn't sign some PSBTs properly. And for the first time in a while, you got this widespread adoption of actually exploiting the whole power of what Bitcoin can do with these PSBTs, with Taproot adoption is at an all-time high right now. And so all of the fundamental building blocks were in place, but now we need to start building on top of that and developing infrastructure on top of Bitcoin to make these things easier for new developers to come in. So that includes, making Lightning more accessible, making Lightning assets more accessible, making libraries for PSBT construction, integrating with wallets like BIP 322, right? That's such an important BIP that basically provides a spec for arbitrary message signing, and nobody implemented it before. This was like such an important part of Bitcoin infrastructure. And then Xverse supports it now, and we have ways of verifying Taproot addresses. I think this is a perfect example of how, even if you aren't on board with ordinals and have no intention of buying an inscription, you should be immediately on board with like all the infrastructure that has been pushed thanks to ordinals marketplaces, ordinals wallets, and ordinals infrastructure. And I'm excited to see what people do with that outside of ordinals even. What can you do with PSBTs even if you don't care about inscriptions or ordinal? What can you do with BIP 322 even if you don't care about verifying a Taproot address?
Yeah, so I think for us, it'll be really interesting to dig up whatever old BIP that's been sitting there for a really long time and see if now they're actually useful. For example, Taproot, when it was launched last year, it barely saw any use. And when ordinals started to take off, a lot of wallets and like exchanges didn't even support Taproot. And people wanted to do these inscriptions, and they couldn't send their Bitcoin to a Taproot address. So the use cases really drive the adoption of this technology, and we're pretty excited to see what else can we use in these new use cases.
It kind of goes along the lines of what we were saying earlier about like adopting the game theory of Bitcoin and the incentive mechanism of Bitcoin. So we've obviously, as you kind of just outlined, we've seen a huge uptick in like the good parts of Bitcoin that should be better understood and more widely used. Is there anything else that kind of stands out that inscriptions are incentivizing or kind of like pushing forward for just general Bitcoin users?
Actually, I do. Can you repeat the question? Sorry, the last one.
Yeah, kind of just reiterating like what else inscriptions are moving forward. Like we talked a lot about nodes and Bitcoin best practices, self-custody. So I guess what do you see like users being interested in next in ordinals?
Yeah, so actually, I do think the users is very quite important for the improve the touch knowledge and also the innovation for the Bitcoin network. And I didn't find out any really great project in that right now, but I do want to see there can be have some new developers in the Bitcoin network to solve this problem.
Yeah, I think what has been interesting is seeing. I feel like it's giving us a taste of the future. You know, like in for example, fee markets, right? Like last week, they hit something like 500 sats per vbyte. For the first time in years, the amount of fees that miners were making in a block was greater than the block subsidy. It was greater than the Coinbase reward. That's an underlying like principle that's almost necessary for the future of Bitcoin. Like this needs to be the case once the block subsidy goes away and once the block subsidy decreases. And if that's the case, then people can't use Bitcoin in the same way that they do when it's 1 sat per vbyte, right? So I think this is pushing forward things like Lightning, things like additional standards, things like using Bitcoin as a settlement layer. And I think that's only a good thing. You're getting like an accelerationist, basically, perspective of what Bitcoin will look like in 10, 20 years, and pushing forward the adoption of not only Bitcoin layer 1 infrastructure, but also the necessary tools that you need to scale as fee markets get more competitive.
Yeah, I would say it's almost like a test run of, maybe like 3 years down the line where Bitcoin sees much more adoption and whether or not, the assumptions that we have today still holds true. So yeah, it's very interesting.
Yeah, people are learning that a lot of the things that you didn't think you could build on Bitcoin, you actually can, and a lot of the rest of the space was kind of a test net in a way. So it's going to be an exciting couple years. We were talking about it backstage that it's seeming very clear that the narrative of the next bull run or the next few years is kind of going to be this protocol and Bitcoin side chains and layers and kind of just bringing that speculation here. So is there anything else that is kind of related to ordinals or alongside ordinals in terms of Bitcoin adoption scaling solutions that you're seeing this drive forward?
Yeah, just like we were talking backstage, I think you'll start to see more work on ZK rollups and BIP 300 drive chains as well, which you had mentioned. I think it's no longer just theoretical. You can't just keep waiting for something to happen. You really do have to like start exploring this more tangibly. And I think there's so much great work by Paul on BIP 300, on Jeremy with BIP 119 and covenants to introduce more functionality as well. So I think this is like the opportunity to come together, let the best ideas win, and push Bitcoin adoption to the next level.
Actually, I'm also optimistic for the Bitcoin network right now because it's a big ordinals can bring the two key things. One is increase miners' revenue, and secondly, to have the potential to change the Bitcoin community's culture. So I do think that if in the future there are lots of developers to transfer from the other ecosystem to the Bitcoin ecosystem, and the whole world can bring lots of infra projects and also some the additional process can increase in the future. So yeah, that's my attitude.
So we are basically at time, but I'd want to get final thoughts from everyone, basically on like where we are a year from now. We're currently in like what 4 months of ordinals being invented. So what does ordinals infrastructure look like 1 year from now at Bitcoin 2024?
Well, for one thing, I hope there's going to be some layer 2 solutions for ordinals as we onboard more people. and hopefully, the fee situation will get better, and also these layer 2s will help adoption of Bitcoin in general, to make it easier for people and cheaper and faster.
I do agree with that. I hope the developers can build more projects to let us invest in. Also, I do look for some new projects. They do focus to solve the problems for the transaction fees, and also especially for the safety issues, and also to keep the Bitcoin network more broadly, and also let the users on board.
I think right now a lot of people are trying to, copy what's worked on Ethereum and Solana and try to bring that to Bitcoin. But I think next year I really want to see Bitcoin culture develop and see ourselves build in the line with sort of Bitcoin culture and Bitcoin values more. Like, for example, the first bug report we ever got, I always use this story, is someone was like, my text file is too big, I can't create this inscription. Like, what are you putting? Like, what are you? And he was putting 1984, like George Orwell's book on the blockchain. Nobody would ever do that on Ethereum or Solana. Like, why? There's just something special and unique about using Bitcoin as a medium for preservation from day one, right? Chancellor on the brink of second bailout, right? Like, you keep these cultural moments and you show what's unique about Bitcoin, what's unique about this protocol that can be used as a force for good, for censorship resistance, for driving our financial system and freedom forward.
Actually,
so more censorship-resistant books on the blockchain over the next year. That sounds good. So we are at time, but thank you all, and thank you everyone for coming.
Thank you, Miami, for the last 3 years in this amazing city. The whole world shut down, but Miami welcomed us with open arms. We want to show Bitcoin to the whole world. We are taking the conference on the road to set the stage for Bitcoin in a new city. Nashville. Bitcoin 2024 is coming to Nashville in Tennessee, a city that is known as a music and freedom city. Bitcoin 2024 in Nashville from July 25th to 27th.